The weight of the world hung on Katherine Zamora's shoulders as she trudged up the muddy main street of Placerville, Colorado, clutching her shawl tightly around her swollen belly, while townspeople who had once greeted her with warm smiles now turned away, their whispers following her like vultures circling overhead. It was 1878, and being unmarried and with child might as well have been a death sentence in a town that prided itself on virtue and godliness. Katherine had worked as the schoolteacher in Placerville for 3 years, respected for her intelligence and dedication to the children's education. She had come west from Pennsylvania after her parents died, seeking a fresh start with nothing but her teaching credentials and determination. For a time, it had been enough. The children loved her, and the parents appreciated the way she handled their rowdy offspring with a firm but gentle hand. Then came Andrew Tanner, a charming businessman from Denver who swept through town with promises of railroad investments and prosperity. He courted her with poetry and gifts, speaking of marriage and a future together. Katherine fell for his lies, and by the time she discovered she was carrying his child, Andrew had disappeared back to Denver, leaving her with nothing but a hastily scribbled note claiming he was already married. She tried to hide her condition as long as possible, but in a town the size of Placerville, secrets had nowhere to hide. Mayor Wilkins had called a town meeting just yesterday, where he'd publicly announced her moral failings and terminated her teaching position. The town council had given her until sundown tomorrow to leave Placerville or face further consequences. Katherine stumbled, catching herself against a hitching post outside the general store. The exertion of walking through town had left her breathless, her back aching fiercely. She was nearly 7 months along, with nowhere to go and winter approaching in the Colorado mountains. Miss Zamora, Mrs. Hendricks, the store owner's wife, hissed from the doorway. "I told you yesterday we don't serve your kind here anymore. Be gone before my husband returns." Katherine straightened her spine, what little pride she had left forcing her chin up. "I need supplies if I'm to leave town, Mrs. Hendricks. I have money to pay." "Your money's no good here." The woman's eyes narrowed to slits. "Your kind brings nothing but corruption to decent folk. Look elsewhere." Fighting back tears, Katherine turned away. She had tried every establishment in town with similar results. No one would sell to her, serve her, or even speak to her beyond hurling insults. Even the women who had once called themselves her friends now crossed the street to avoid her. She had only a small amount of money saved and nowhere to go. The nearest town was 30 miles away, impossible on foot in her condition, especially with winter coming. Denver was even further, and she had no desire to face Andrew or his wife. As Katherine walked toward the edge of town where her small rented room waited, a commotion drew her attention to the livery stable. A tall, broad-shouldered man was arguing with the blacksmith, his deep voice carrying across the street. "That's outright highway robbery, Jones, and you know it. I've been buying horseshoes from you for 5 years, and suddenly they're double the price. Take it or leave it, Quinn." "That's my offer." "Then I'll take my business elsewhere. Shame to end things this way." Katherine watched as the man Quinn untied a magnificent chestnut stallion from the hitching post and mounted in one fluid motion. His weathered Stetson shadowed his face, but she could see a strong jaw dusted with several days' worth of beard. He wore the practical garb of a rancher, worn leather chaps over denim, a faded blue shirt, and a sheepskin coat against the autumn chill. As he turned his horse, his eyes met Katherine's, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. But not before she noticed their striking blue color, as clear as a mountain lake. She hurried on, eager to return to her room and plan her next move, though her options seemed to dwindle by the hour. Quinn Garrison frowned as he rode slowly past the young woman. He didn't know her name, but he'd seen her around town before. The schoolteacher, if he remembered correctly. Something seemed different about her now, the way she hunched her shoulders, the careful way she walked, and most noticeably, the swell of her belly beneath her worn coat. Quinn wasn't one to involve himself in town affairs. His ranch, the North Star, lay 15 miles outside Placerville, and he came to town only when necessary for supplies or to ship his cattle. He preferred the solitude of his land, the company of his animals, and the few ranch hands he employed. But something about the woman's expression, a mixture of fear and defiance, caught his attention. He tipped his hat to her as he passed, a simple courtesy that earned him a surprised glance and a slight nod in return. Her eyes were large and dark, set in a face that might have been pretty had it not been so pale and drawn with exhaustion. "Come on, Ranger," he murmured to his horse, urging him toward the general store. He had supplies to buy before heading back to his ranch. Inside the store, Quinn was met with the usual friendly greeting from Mr. Hendricks, but the shopkeeper seemed distracted, his wife whispering furiously to another woman in the corner. "Disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful," Mrs. Hendricks was saying. "Parading her shame through town as if it's nothing. And she had the nerve to try to shop here, after corrupting our children's minds for who knows how long." Quinn kept his expression neutral as he placed his order for flour, coffee, beans, and ammunition. The Hendricks continued their conversation as if he weren't there. "Mayor says she's got till tomorrow to clear out. Good riddance, I say. We can't have someone like that influencing decent folks." "Where's she supposed to go?" Quinn found himself asking, surprising even himself with the question. Mrs. Hendricks looked at him as if he'd grown a second head. "That's hardly our concern, Mr. Garrison. The woman made her bed quite literally, I'm afraid." She tittered at her own joke. "She's with child and winter's coming on," Quinn said, his voice level but firm. "Seems a mite harsh to turn her out with nowhere to go." "Mr. Garrison," Mr. Hendricks cut in, "I wouldn't have pegged you as a defender of loose women. The former Miss Zamora has disgraced herself in this town. The council's decision is final." Quinn said nothing more as he paid for his supplies, but his mind was working. Miss Zamora. Now he had a name. He loaded his purchases onto Ranger and headed to the town's small hotel and restaurant. Inside, he found Sheriff Miller nursing a cup of coffee. "Afternoon, Quinn," the sheriff nodded. "Don't usually see you in town twice in 1 month." Quinn ordered coffee and took a seat across from Miller. He'd known the sheriff for years and respected the man's fairness, even if they weren't exactly friends. "Heard there's some trouble with the schoolteacher," Quinn said after taking a sip of his coffee. Sheriff Miller sighed heavily. "Not trouble I'd choose to deal with, but the mayor and council are adamant. Poor girl. She's a good teacher, was a good teacher," he corrected himself. "What's her story?" Katherine Zamora came from back east 3 years ago, kept to herself mostly except for her teaching. Then that snake Tanner came through town, wooing her with fancy talk of marriage, left her high and dry when he found out she was expecting. The sheriff shook his head. "Should have run him out of town the minute he arrived. Never did trust railroad men. And now the town's turning her out. Where's she supposed to go?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "I don't make the rules, Quinn. I just enforce them. Mayor says her presence is detrimental to public morality. Between you and me, I think it's more that Mrs. Wilkins can't stand the idea of her precious son seeing that women can make mistakes." Quinn drummed his fingers on the table. "When's she leaving?" "Tomorrow, if she can find a way. No one will sell her a horse or rent her a wagon." "Not sure what the council expects her to do, crawl out of town." The sheriff's disgust was evident. Quinn finished his coffee in silence, his mind made up. He wasn't sure why he felt compelled to intervene, but the thought of a pregnant woman turned out to face the harsh Colorado winter alone didn't sit right with him. "Thanks for the information," he said, standing and placing a few coins on the table. The sheriff eyed him suspiciously. "You're not thinking of doing something foolish, are you, Garrison? The town council won't take kindly to anyone interfering with their decision." Quinn adjusted his hat. "Never been much concerned with what the town council thinks, Sheriff. Good day to you." It took some asking around, but Quinn finally discovered where Katherine Zamora lived, a small room above the town's seamstress shop. He tied Ranger to a post across the street and waited, watching the building. Evening was falling, the autumn air growing sharper with cold when he saw her emerge, carrying a bucket toward the town well. She moved slowly, one hand supporting her lower back, and Quinn found himself moving forward to intercept her before he'd fully thought it through. "Miss Zamora," he said, removing his hat as he approached. "Allow me to help you with that." Katherine startled, nearly dropping the bucket as she took a step back. "I don't require assistance, sir," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Maybe not, but I'm offering all the same." Quinn reached for the bucket, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Quinn Garrison, madam. I own the North Star Ranch outside town." She regarded him suspiciously, and he couldn't blame her. After the town's treatment, she had every reason to distrust strangers. "I know who you are, Mr. Garrison," she finally said. "I've taught several of your ranch hands' children." Quinn nodded. "Then you've got the advantage of me. May I?" He gestured to the bucket again. After a moment's hesitation, she relinquished it. "Thank you," she murmured. They walked to the well in silence, Quinn painfully aware of how her shoulders remained tense, her gaze darting around as if expecting an attack from any direction. At the well, he filled the bucket with water and carried it back toward her lodging. "I heard about the council's decision," he said as they walked. "It's not right." Katherine's step faltered slightly. "The council made their position quite clear, Mr. Garrison. I doubt there's anything to be done about it now." "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked directly. She stopped walking entirely, turning to face him. In the fading light, her eyes seemed impossibly dark, her face a mask of pride wrestling with desperation. "Why do you ask? Has the council sent you to ensure I truly leave? I assure you, I have no desire to stay where I'm not wanted." "No one sent me," Quinn replied. "I'm asking because I'm concerned. Winter's coming and you're in no condition to travel far." Katherine's hand moved protectively to her belly. "My condition is none of your concern, Mr. Garrison." "No, it's not," he agreed. "But your safety is the concern of any decent man, and I try to be one of those, at least." Something in his tone must have convinced her of his sincerity, for her expression softened slightly. "I appreciate your concern," she said quietly. "But I have no family, no friends willing to stand by me now. I have a little money saved. I thought perhaps I might reach Denver, find work there." Quinn frowned. "Denver's 100 miles, Miss Zamora. Not a journey to undertake alone in your condition, especially with snow likely any day now." They had reached her door, and Katherine took the bucket from him with a nod of thanks. "I'm aware of the challenges, Mr. Garrison, but as I have no other options, I'll have to face them." Quinn hesitated, then took the plunge. "What if you did have another option?" She looked at him warily. "What do you mean?" "I have a ranch, as I mentioned, 15 miles north of here. Good land, plenty of room. There's an old trapper's cabin on the property not far from the main house. It needs some work, but it's solid. You'd be welcome to stay there, at least until spring when travel would be safer." Katherine's eyes widened with shock. "You're offering shelter to a woman you barely know, a woman the town has deemed unfit for society." "I'm offering shelter to someone who needs it," Quinn corrected. The town's opinion means little to me, Miss Zamora. I've never put much stock in gossip or judgment. Why would you do this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Quinn considered the question seriously. Because it's the right thing to do. Because no one should be cast out with nowhere to go. Because I have the means to help, and that seems reason enough. Katherine studied his face as if searching for some hidden motive. People will talk, Mr. Garrison. They'll assume things about your character for associating with me. Quinn couldn't help the slight smile that curved his lips. Miss Zamora, I've lived 15 miles from the nearest neighbor for 10 years by choice. If I cared what people thought, I'd have moved into town long ago. She didn't return his smile, but some of the tension left her shoulders. It's a generous offer, Mr. Garrison, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition, he interrupted gently. The cabin sits empty, and I've been meaning to fix it up anyway. You'd be doing me a favor, giving me a reason to finally get to it. A flicker of hope appeared in her eyes, quickly tempered by caution. And what would you expect in return for this kindness? The implication was clear, and Quinn felt a flash of anger not at her, but at the circumstances that would make her ask such a question. Nothing, he said firmly. The cabin would be yours for as long as you need it. Your business is your own. I ask only that you allow me to help when help is needed. Katherine's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them away quickly. I don't know what to say, Mr. Garrison. Say you'll consider it, he replied. I'll return in the morning with a wagon. If you decide to accept, I'll take you and your belongings to the North Star. If not, no harm done. She nodded slowly. I'll consider it, Mr. Garrison, and thank you for your kindness. Quinn replaced his hat and tipped it slightly. Until tomorrow, Miss Zamora. As he walked back to where Ranger waited, Quinn wondered what had possessed him to make such an offer. He valued his solitude, had built his life around it after the war left him with little taste for crowds and noise. Taking in a pregnant, unmarried schoolteacher cast out by the town was sure to bring complications he hadn't planned for. Yet he couldn't bring himself to regret the offer. Something about Katherine Zamora's quiet dignity in the face of the town's cruelty had stirred something in him, a sense of injustice, perhaps, or simply the basic human desire to help someone in need. Whatever it was, Quinn found himself hoping she would accept his offer as he rode back to the North Star under a sky full of stars, the promise of snow heavy in the air. Katherine closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her mind reeling from the unexpected encounter. Quinn Garrison was known in Placerville as a man who kept to himself fair in his dealings, but not one for socializing. She had indeed taught several of his ranch hands' children and heard only good things about him as an employer. But beyond that, he was something of a mystery. And now he had offered her sanctuary when no one else would. Katherine moved to the small window of her rented room and looked out at the darkening town. Placerville had been her home for 3 years, yet it had turned on her so quickly. Only yesterday, she had greeted her students with stories and lessons. Today, their parents pulled them away if they happened to see her on the street. She pressed a hand to her swollen belly as the baby kicked vigorously. "What should we do, little one?" she whispered. Trust a stranger or face the wilderness alone. The decision seemed simple when framed that way, yet Katherine hesitated. Quinn Garrison seemed sincere, but she had trusted Andrew Tanner's sincerity as well, and that had led to her current predicament. How could she be sure this wasn't another trap, another man seeking to take advantage? Then again, what choice did she really have? Denver was too far, especially with winter approaching. She had been turned away from every establishment in town today, unable even to purchase supplies for a journey. Her savings would not last long, and soon she would have a child to care for. Katherine moved away from the window and began to gather her meager possessions. She had until morning to decide, but in her heart, she already knew what her answer would be. Quinn rose before dawn the next morning, as was his habit. He ate a simple breakfast, then set about preparing for the journey to town. He hitched his team to the wagon, loaded it with blankets for the return journey, and set a pot of stew simmering for later. If Katherine accepted his offer, she would need a hot meal after the trip to the ranch. As he worked, Quinn couldn't help but wonder if she would actually agree to come. He wouldn't blame her for declining after all. He was a stranger, and she had no reason to trust his intentions. Still, he hoped her practical needs would outweigh her understandable caution. He reached Placerville just as the town was coming to life, the early morning sun painting the mountains gold behind the cluster of wooden buildings. Quinn drove the wagon straight to Katherine's lodging and tethered the horses before climbing the stairs to her door. His knock was answered almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for him. Katherine stood in the doorway, her belongings packed in two small trunks behind her. She wore a simple blue dress, her dark hair neatly braided and a determined expression on her face. "Good morning, Mr. Garrison," she said, her voice steadier than it had been yesterday. "Miss Zamora," he nodded, removing his hat. "Have you made your decision?" Katherine took a deep breath. "I have. If your offer still stands, I would be grateful for the shelter of your cabin until spring." Relief washed through Quinn, though he kept his expression neutral. "The offer stands. May I help with your trunks?" She stepped aside to let him enter. "I don't have much. Just clothes, some books, and teaching materials." Quinn lifted the trunks easily, noting their lightness. A woman's entire life packed into two small boxes. He carried them down to the wagon while Katherine followed with a worn carpetbag and a small basket. As they loaded her belongings, Quinn noticed several townspeople watching from across the street, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disapproval. Katherine kept her head high, though her knuckles were white where she gripped her basket. "Ready?" Quinn asked quietly. She nodded, and he helped her onto the wagon seat before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. As they pulled away from the boarding house, Quinn was conscious of Katherine's rigid posture, her eyes fixed straight ahead to avoid the stares of her former neighbors. They were nearly at the edge of town when Mayor Wilkins stepped into the street, raising a hand to stop them. Quinn pulled the horses to a halt, feeling Katherine tense beside him. "Garrison," the mayor called, approaching the wagon. "What's the meaning of this?" "Just giving a neighbor a ride, Mayor," Quinn replied calmly. Wilkins's face reddened. "This woman has been ordered to leave Placerville by the town council. As a property owner in this county, you should respect the council's decisions." "I do respect them," Quinn said. "Miss Zamora is indeed leaving Placerville, as ordered. She'll be staying at my ranch, which last I checked, falls outside town limits." The mayor sputtered indignantly. "This is an outrage. You're undermining the moral authority of this community." Quinn leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping so only Wilkins could hear. "The only outrage I see is turning a pregnant woman out with nowhere to go, Mayor. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a long ride ahead." "This won't be forgotten, Garrison," Wilkins threatened, stepping back from the wagon. "You're making enemies today." Quinn flicked the reins gently. "Wouldn't be the first time," he replied as the wagon lurched forward, leaving the mayor fuming in their wake. They traveled in silence for several miles, the town receding behind them as they followed the winding road toward the North Star. The day was clear but cold, the sun doing little to warm the crisp autumn air. Quinn glanced occasionally at Katherine, noting how she wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "There's a blanket behind the seat if you're cold," he said. Katherine shook her head. I'm fine, thank you. After a moment, she added, You shouldn't have antagonized the mayor on my account, Mr. Garrison. He can make things difficult for you. Quinn shrugged. Wilkins and I have never seen eye to eye. This won't change much between us. Still, I don't wish to be the cause of trouble for you after you've shown such kindness. Don't concern yourself with it, Quinn assured her. The North Star is largely self-sufficient. I don't depend on Placerville for much. Katherine fell silent again, her gaze on the passing landscape. The road followed a river valley, the surrounding hills splashed with the gold and crimson of turning leaves. In the distance, snow-capped peaks reached toward a cloudless sky. It's beautiful country, she said softly. That it is, Quinn agreed. One of the reasons I settled here after the war. Seemed like a good place to find some peace. You fought in the war? Katherine asked, glancing at him with genuine interest for the first time. Quinn nodded. Union cavalry. Spent 4 years riding through places a lot less pretty than this. My father and older brother both served, Katherine said. Father came home, Daniel didn't. I'm sorry, Quinn said simply. It was a long time ago. I was just a girl when they left. She paused, then added, My parents died of influenza 5 years back. That's when I decided to come west. There was nothing left for me in Pennsylvania. Quinn didn't push for more details, and Katherine seemed content to let the conversation lapse. They continued their journey through the valley, the horses maintaining a steady pace on the well-traveled road. Around midday, Quinn stopped to rest the team and offered Katherine some bread and cheese he'd brought along. They ate in companionable silence, sitting on a fallen log near the river. The water rushed by, clear and cold on its way down from the mountains. How much further? Katherine asked as they prepared to resume their journey. Another hour or so, Quinn replied, helping her back onto the wagon seat. We'll reach the north boundary of the ranch soon, but it's a good stretch to the house and cabin from there. As they traveled on, Quinn pointed out landmarks, a distinctive peak the locals called Eagle's Nest, the creek that ran through his property, a stand of aspen trees that blazed golden against the darker pines. Katherine listened attentively, asking occasional questions about the ranch and its operations. It's mostly cattle, Quinn explained. About 500 head. I've got 4 full-time hands working for me, good men with families. They live in cabins near the main house. There's some crops too, enough to feed us and the livestock through winter. And you manage all this yourself? Katherine asked, a new respect in her voice. With help, Quinn nodded. I've been building it up for 10 years now. Started with just 50 acres and a dozen cattle. Now the ranch covers nearly 1,000 acres. They crested a hill, and Quinn pulled the wagon to a stop. There it is, he said, gesturing ahead. The North Star. Below them stretched a broad valley bisected by a winding creek. Nestled against the base of a wooded hill sat a sturdy log house, smoke curling from its chimney. Nearby stood a large barn and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the meadows, and in the distance, horses moved in a fenced paddock. Katherine drew in a breath. It's lovely. Quinn felt an unexpected surge of pride at her words. It's home, he said simply, flicking the reins to continue their descent into the valley. As they approached the main house, a lean, weathered man emerged from the barn, raising a hand in greeting. Quinn returned the gesture. That's Hank Miller, my foreman, he explained to Katherine. He and his wife Ellie live in the largest of the workers' cabins. They've been with me almost from the beginning. Quinn pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house, a 2-story structure built of squared logs with a wide porch across the front. The windows gleamed in the afternoon sun, smoke rising steadily from the stone chimney. Hank approached, his curious gaze taking in Katherine. "Didn't expect you back so soon, boss," he said, helping to secure the team. "Change of plans," Quinn replied, jumping down from the wagon before turning to assist Katherine. "Hank, this is Miss Katherine Zamora, formerly the schoolteacher in Placerville. She'll be staying in the old trapper's cabin for a while. Miss Zamora, this is Hank Miller." If Hank was surprised by the introduction or Katherine's obvious condition, he hid it well, touching the brim of his hat respectfully. "Madam, welcome to the North Star." "Thank you, Mr. Miller," Katherine replied, her hand resting protectively on her belly as Quinn helped her down from the wagon. "The cabin needs work before it's properly habitable," Quinn said to Hank. "Miss Zamora will stay in the guest room tonight while we get it ready." Hank nodded. "I'll round up the boys to help tomorrow. Place hasn't been used in a couple years, but the roof was sound last I checked." "Much appreciated," Quinn said. "Could you ask Ellie to come up to the house when she has a moment? Miss Zamora might appreciate a woman's company after our journey." "Will do, boss." With a respectful nod to Katherine, Hank moved off toward the workers' cabins visible a short distance away. Quinn turned to Katherine. "Let's get you inside and rested. I'll bring in your things." The inside of Quinn's house was surprisingly comfortable for a bachelor rancher. The main room was dominated by a large stone fireplace, where a fire crackled welcomingly. Sturdy, handcrafted furniture was arranged to take advantage of the warmth, and bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that suggested Quinn was more well-read than his rough exterior might indicate. Katherine stood in the center of the room, taking it all in while Quinn brought in her trunks. "It's not what I expected," she admitted. Quinn set down her belongings. "What were you expecting? Something more? Spartan, I suppose. This feels like a home." "Been building it piece by piece over the years," he replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "The guest room is upstairs, first door on the right. There's a washstand with fresh water if you'd like to refresh yourself. I've got stew simmering in the kitchen." Katherine nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the day and her new circumstances. "Thank you, Mr. Garrison, for everything." "Quinn," he said, "if you're going to be staying on my land, you might as well use my given name." A slight smile touched her lips. "Quinn, then." "And you should call me Katherine." "Katherine," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I'll bring your trunks upstairs, then see about that stew." Left alone in the guest room, Katherine sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion washing over her. The room was simple but clean, with a comfortable-looking bed, a chest of drawers, and a small writing desk near the window. Fresh linens were folded at the foot of the bed, and a colorful quilt provided a welcoming touch. She moved to the washstand and splashed cool water on her face, the simple act refreshing her after the long journey. As she dried her face on the provided towel, Katherine caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror above the stand. Her face was thinner than it had been before her pregnancy, dark circles shadowing her eyes from restless nights worrying about her future. Her dark hair, once her pride, was pulled back in a simple braid, a few strands escaping to frame her face. At 25, she felt decades older than she had just months ago when Andrew Tanner had first walked into her classroom with his charming smile. Katherine placed a hand on her belly as the baby shifted within her. "We'll be all right," she whispered, as much to convince herself as to reassure her unborn child. "We have shelter, at least." A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Katherine," a woman's voice called, "may I come in?" "Yes, please," Katherine replied, turning from the mirror. The door opened to reveal a plump, pleasant-faced woman in her 40s, her graying blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun. "I'm Ellie Miller," she said, stepping into the room. "Hank's wife. Quinn asked me to check if you needed anything." Katherine managed a smile. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Miller. I'm Katherine Zamora." "Ellie, please," the woman insisted, her kind eyes taking in Catherine's condition with understanding rather than judgment. "Quinn told Hank you might be staying in the old trapper's cabin. Is there anything you need right away? I can bring some extra linens, perhaps some of my clothes that might be more comfortable in your condition." Unexpected tears pricked at Catherine's eyes at the woman's matter-of-fact kindness. "That's very generous of you." Ellie stepped closer, her expression softening. "It's not easy, being in your situation. I won't pry into your circumstances, but I want you to know you're welcome here. The North Star is a good place, and Quinn is a good man, though he keeps to himself more than most." "I barely know him," Katherine admitted. His offer of shelter was unexpected. "That's Quinn," Ellie nodded. "Man of few words, but when he does decide to act, it's usually to do the right thing." She glanced around the room. "You rest a bit before dinner. I'll bring those things by tomorrow when we start getting the cabin ready." After Ellie left, Katherine sat again on the edge of the bed, her mind working to process the day's events. Just 24 hours ago, she had been facing the prospect of being cast out with nowhere to go. Now she had shelter, the promise of a cabin of her own, and apparently, people willing to help her without judgment. It seemed almost too good to be true, and a lifetime of practical experience had taught Katherine to be wary of things that seemed too good to be true. Yet she couldn't deny the genuine kindness she'd seen in Quinn's eyes, or the straightforward welcome from Ellie Miller. Perhaps, just perhaps, she had found a safe harbor after all. Downstairs, Quinn stirred the pot of venison stew, adding a bit more salt and checking that the cornbread in the oven wasn't burning. He wasn't much of a cook, but years of bachelor living had taught him enough to get by. Still, he found himself wishing he'd had more warning to prepare something better for his unexpected guest. Hank entered through the kitchen door without knocking, their relationship long past such formalities. "Ellie's with her now," he reported, taking a seat at the kitchen table. "Want to tell me what this is all about, boss?" Quinn gave his foreman a brief account of the situation in Placerville and his decision to offer Katherine shelter. Hank listened without interruption, his weathered face thoughtful. "Town council's got no right turning out a woman in her condition," he said when Quinn finished. "Don't care what she did or didn't do. That's not Christian behavior." "My thoughts exactly," Quinn agreed, removing the cornbread from the oven. Hank studied him for a moment. "This isn't like you, though, taking in strays. You've always kept to yourself, especially where women are concerned." Quinn shrugged, uncomfortable with his foreman's scrutiny. "It was the right thing to do. Nothing more to it than that." Hank didn't sound convinced. "Well, the boys and I will get that cabin fixed up proper, don't you worry. Needs a good cleaning, some patching on the roof, maybe a new door. Should be ready in a few days if we all pitch in." "I appreciate it," Quinn said. "And Hank, I'd be obliged if you'd make it clear to everyone that Miss Zamora's past is her own business. She's to be treated with respect." "Don't even need to say it," Hank assured him, rising from the table. "North Star folks take care of their own, and if you say she's under your protection, that's good enough for all of us." He paused at the door. "Dinner smells good. Might want to set a place for Ellie, too. Once she gets to mothering someone, she's not likely to leave until she's satisfied they're properly cared for." Quinn smiled slightly. "I'll set 3 places." After Hank left, Quinn set the table in the dining room, a space he rarely used, preferring to eat his meals in the kitchen or on the porch in good weather. Tonight, however, seemed to call for a bit more formality. As he laid out plates and utensils, Quinn found himself wondering what had possessed him to bring Katherine Zamora to his ranch. He had built his life around solitude, finding peace in the routine of ranch work and the quiet of his evenings alone with his books. Taking in a pregnant woman cast out by her town wasn't just out of character. It was potentially disruptive to the careful order he had established. Yet when he thought of the alternatives, Katherine struggling alone on the road to Denver, or worse, being forced to remain in a hostile Placerville, he knew he couldn't have done otherwise. Quinn was setting a vase of dried wildflowers Ellie had brought last week on the table when he heard footsteps on the stairs. He looked up to see Katherine descending, one hand on the railing for support. She had washed up and changed into a clean dress, her hair freshly braided. Even with the signs of fatigue still evident on her face, there was a quiet dignity in her bearing that Quinn couldn't help but admire. "Feeling better?" he asked. She nodded. "Much, thank you. Your home is very comfortable." "It serves its purpose," Quinn replied. "Dinner's nearly ready. Ellie will be joining us if that's all right with you." "Of course," Katherine said. She was very kind. "Ellie's the heart of the North Star," Quinn said, leading the way to the dining room. "Don't know what we'd all do without her keeping us in line." Dinner was a pleasant affair, largely thanks to Ellie's gift for conversation. She drew Katherine out gently, asking about her teaching experience and her interests, carefully avoiding any mention of Placerville's treatment or her pregnancy. Quinn was content to listen, contributing occasionally but mostly observing the way Katherine gradually relaxed in Ellie's motherly presence. "Quinn tells me you were teaching in Placerville for 3 years," Ellie said as they enjoyed slices of apple pie she had brought from her own kitchen. "The children must have been devastated to lose you as their teacher." A shadow crossed Katherine's face. "I wasn't allowed to say goodbye to them properly. It happened rather suddenly." Ellie reached across the table to pat Katherine's hand. "Children are resilient and they remember kindness. They won't forget you." "Perhaps," Katherine murmured, "though their parents will make sure they learn the proper moral lessons from my disgrace. People can be cruel when they are afraid," Ellie said thoughtfully. "And nothing frightens respectable folk more than being reminded that respectability is often just a matter of luck and circumstance." Quinn glanced at Ellie with new appreciation. Beneath her motherly exterior lay a surprisingly philosophical mind. "I've never thought of it that way," Katherine admitted. "But you're right. If Andrew had married me as he promised, I'd still be considered respectable, regardless of when the baby came." It was the first time she had mentioned the father of her child, and Quinn found himself unexpectedly curious about the man who had abandoned her to face the consequences alone. He kept his questions to himself, however, respecting her privacy. After dinner, Ellie insisted on helping clean up despite Katherine's protests that she should rest. The two women disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Quinn to build up the fire in the main room. He could hear their voices from the kitchen, Ellie's maternal tones mixed with Katherine's softer replies, occasionally punctuated by gentle laughter. The sound was unfamiliar in his house, which was usually silent apart from the crackle of the fire and the occasional creaking of the timbers. Quinn found he didn't mind it as much as he might have expected. When the women emerged from the kitchen, Ellie announced she should be getting back to her own cabin. "Hank will be wondering where I've got to. Katherine, you rest well tonight. I'll be back in the morning to help get started on the cabin." After Ellie departed, an awkward silence fell between Quinn and Katherine. They were suddenly aware of being alone together in his home, virtual strangers, despite the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. "I should retire as well," Katherine said after a moment. "It's been a long day and I tire easily these days." Quinn nodded. "Of course. If you need anything during the night, my room is at the end of the hall. Don't hesitate to wake me." "Thank you," Katherine said, moving toward the stairs. She paused, turning back to him. "Quinn, I'm not sure how to properly express my gratitude for what you've done today. You've saved me from an impossible situation." "No need for thanks," Quinn replied, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll start getting the cabin ready for you and the little one." Katherine smiled slightly, her hand moving automatically to her belly. "Good night, then." Quinn remained by the fire long after she had gone upstairs, listening to the occasional creak of floorboards as she prepared for bed. Taking in Katherine Zamora had been an impulsive decision, one that would undoubtedly complicate his carefully ordered life. Yet watching her smile at dinner, seeing the burden of worry lift from her shoulders even momentarily, had given him a satisfaction he hadn't expected. Perhaps, he reflected as he banked the fire for the night, complications weren't always unwelcome. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, with the promise of a fine autumn day. Quinn rose at his usual early hour and was surprised to find Katherine already in the kitchen, a pot of coffee brewing on the stove. "Good morning," she said, turning at his entrance. "I hope you don't mind. I'm used to early hours and I wanted to make myself useful." "Not at all," Quinn replied, hiding his surprise. "Coffee smells good." "It's the least I can do," Katherine said, pouring him a cup. "I may not be able to help much with the heavy work on the cabin, but I can certainly manage cooking and other household tasks while I'm staying in your home." Quinn accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "You don't need to earn your keep, Katherine." "Perhaps not, but I'd prefer to contribute what I can," she replied firmly. "Idleness has never suited me." They shared a simple breakfast of oatmeal and the remaining cornbread from the previous night. Katherine asked thoughtful questions about the ranch operations, and Quinn found himself explaining more than he usually would about his daily routines and plans for the coming winter. "The cattle need to be moved to the lower pastures before the first heavy snow," he explained. "We've been reinforcing the fencing there this past week. Once they're settled, we'll bring in the last of the hay and make sure the barn is ready for winter births." "It sounds like a well-organized operation," Katherine observed. "Has to be out here," Quinn replied. "Winter's no joke in these mountains. A man who isn't prepared won't survive his first season." After breakfast, Quinn showed Katherine around the immediate vicinity of the house, the barn, the vegetable garden now mostly harvested for winter storage, and the smokehouse where meat was preserved. She listened attentively, asking intelligent questions that revealed her natural curiosity and quick mind. As promised, Ellie arrived mid-morning, bringing a bundle of linens and clothing. Shortly after, Hank appeared with 3 ranch hands in tow, ready to begin work on the trapper's cabin. "This is Tom Walker, Jeb Simmons, and Miguel Reyes." Hank introduced the men to Katherine. Each tipped his hat respectfully, their eyes curious but not judgmental. "Miss Zamora will be staying in the old trapper's cabin," Quinn informed them. "It needs work before it's properly habitable." "We'll have it fixed up in no time, boss," Tom assured him. Tom was the youngest of the hands, barely 20, with an open, friendly face and boundless energy. "Miss Zamora, you're welcome to see the cabin now if you'd like," Quinn offered. "It's about a quarter-mile from here near the creek." Katherine nodded. "I'd like that very much." The walk to the cabin took them through a stand of aspen trees, their golden leaves shimmering in the morning light. Beyond the trees, the land opened to a small clearing near the creek, where a sturdy log cabin stood. Though clearly abandoned for some time, its basic structure appeared sound, with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. "It's not much to look at now," Quinn said as they approached, "but it was built to last. Old Jim Turner, the trapper who built it, knew his business." The men had gone ahead and were already assessing what needed to be done. Hank was examining the roof, while Tom and Jeb cleared debris from around the porch. Miguel, a skilled carpenter, was inspecting the door and windows. "Roof needs some patching," Hank called down, but the beams are solid. No rot that I can see. Quinn nodded, then turned to Katherine. Shall we look inside? The interior of the cabin consisted of a single large room with a loft above. Dust and cobwebs covered every surface, and a family of mice had clearly made themselves at home in one corner, but Katherine could see the potential beneath the years of neglect. The stone fireplace dominated one wall, large enough to heat the entire space in winter. Windows on 3 sides would provide ample light during the day. The loft, accessible by a sturdy ladder, offered additional sleeping space or storage. "What do you think?" Quinn asked, watching her expression carefully. Katherine moved slowly through the space, envisioning how it could be with proper cleaning and furnishing. "It's perfect," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "With some work, it will make a wonderful home for us." Quinn seemed pleased by her response. "We'll start by getting it cleaned out and making any necessary repairs. Then we can think about furnishings. I have some extra pieces in storage that might suit." Over the next few days, the cabin was transformed through the combined efforts of Quinn, his ranch hands, and the women. The men repaired the roof, replaced the door and window frames, and reinforced the porch. Katherine, despite her condition, insisted on helping with the cleaning once the structural repairs were complete. Ellie joined her, and together they scrubbed every surface until the cabin gleamed. Quinn surprised Katherine by revealing hidden talents as a furniture maker. He and Miguel brought several pieces from storage: a sturdy table with benches, a rocking chair, a chest of drawers, and Quinn spent evenings crafting a bed frame sized perfectly for the corner near the fireplace. "Where did you learn woodworking?" Katherine asked one evening as she watched him smooth the headboard with careful attention to detail. "My father was a carpenter before he took up farming," Quinn replied without looking up from his work. "He taught me the basics, found I had a knack for it." "You have many unexpected talents, Quinn Garrison," Katherine observed, a hint of admiration in her voice. Quinn glanced up, a rare smile softening his features. "Just practical skills for living out here. Nothing special." Katherine disagreed but didn't press the point. Over the past few days, she had come to appreciate Quinn's modest nature, the way he shrugged off praise for his many abilities. He was a man who measured himself by his actions rather than his words, and those actions spoke volumes about his character. By the end of the week, the cabin was habitable, though still somewhat sparse. A proper mattress had been brought from town by Jeb, who made the journey for supplies. Ellie contributed curtains sewn from fabric she had been saving, and the men gathered enough firewood to last several weeks, stacking it neatly against the side of the cabin. "It's more than I could have hoped for," Katherine said as she and Quinn stood in the doorway, surveying the completed work. The afternoon sun streamed through clean windows, highlighting the simple but comfortable furnishings. A fire crackled in the hearth, taking the autumn chill from the air. "It's a good start," Quinn nodded. "We can add more as needed. The important thing is that it's warm and secure." Katherine turned to face him directly. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness, Quinn." He seemed uncomfortable with her gratitude, as he always did. No need to think about repayment. Just focus on staying well and preparing for the little one. That evening, Katherine moved from Quinn's guest room to her new home. Ellie had prepared a small supper that waited on the table, and Quinn had made sure the fire was built up to last through the night. As they said their good nights, Katherine felt a curious mixture of gratitude and trepidation. For the first time since leaving Placerville, she would be truly alone with her thoughts and fears about the future. After Quinn left, Katherine sat in the rocking chair by the fire, her hands resting on her swollen belly. The baby was active tonight, kicking and shifting as if aware of the change in surroundings. "This is our home now," she whispered. "At least for a while." Outside, the wind whispered through the aspen leaves, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The North Star Ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms, and Katherine Zamora, teacher and mother-to-be, began to imagine a future different from anything she had planned. The days that followed established a new rhythm to life at the North Star. Katherine quickly became a part of the ranch's daily operations, helping Ellie with meals for the ranch hands and taking on mending and other household tasks that had previously fallen to Quinn or been neglected entirely. Though her pregnancy limited her physically, her mind was sharp and her hands capable. Quinn found himself unexpectedly enjoying her presence. Katherine had a quick wit and a way of seeing to the heart of matters that he appreciated. She was well-read too, and their evening conversations often turned to books they had both enjoyed or topics ranging from politics to philosophy. "I never expected to find someone so well-versed in Emerson out here," Katherine remarked one evening as they sat on her cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in spectacular hues of orange and purple. "Not much to do during winter evenings but read," Quinn replied with a slight shrug. "Books are good company." "Yes, they are," Katherine agreed, her hands absently stroking her belly, a gesture he had noticed she often made when relaxed. "Though I confess I've missed having someone to discuss them with. Teaching gave me that outlet in a limited way." "Do you miss it? Teaching?" A shadow crossed her face. "Every day. The children they were the best part of Placerville." Quinn hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind. "What will you do come spring?" "Return to teaching somewhere new," Katherine sighed softly. "I don't know. With a baby, my options are limited. Few schools would hire an unmarried mother, regardless of my qualifications." She glanced at him. "But that's a worry for another day. For now, I'm grateful just to have shelter and friendship." The word hung between them, a tentative acknowledgement of the bond that had begun to form. Quinn nodded, accepting it. "You have both for as long as you need them." As October gave way to November, the weather turned colder. The first snow dusted the mountain peaks, a harbinger of the winter to come. Quinn and his men worked long days moving the cattle to winter pasture and ensuring all preparations for the cold months were complete. Katherine's pregnancy advanced, her movements becoming more awkward as her belly grew. Ellie visited daily, bringing supplies and companionship, and sharing practical advice about childbirth and infant care. "My sister's a midwife over in Green River," Ellie told Katherine one afternoon as they worked together in the cabin, organizing baby clothes she had brought. "I've sent word asking her to come stay with us as your time approaches. Sarah knows more about birthing babies than anyone in 3 counties. Katherine's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Ellie. I've been trying not to worry, but—" "Every first-time mother worries," Ellie assured her. "It's natural. But you're strong and healthy, and Sarah will make sure everything goes as it should." Quinn, too, found himself increasingly concerned for Katherine's welfare as her pregnancy progressed. He made a point of visiting her cabin at least twice daily, bringing supplies and checking that she had everything she needed. He split extra firewood to ensure she never ran short and spent evenings crafting a cradle for the coming baby. "You don't need to fuss so much," Katherine told him one evening as he stoked her fire to a blaze before leaving for the night. "I'm pregnant, not helpless." "Humor me," Quinn replied. "Winter's coming on and I sleep better knowing you're warm enough." Katherine studied him thoughtfully. "You're a good man, Quinn Garrison, better than most." He ducked his head, uncomfortable with her praise. "Just doing what needs doing." As November progressed, news came from Placerville that heightened tensions at the North Star. Jeb returned from a supply run with troubling information. "Town's talking, boss," he reported to Quinn as they worked in the barn. "Mayor Wilkins has been stirring up sentiment against you for taking in Miss Zamora. Some of the more righteous folks are saying you've brought shame on the whole county." Quinn continued brushing down his horse, his expression impassive. "Let them talk. Words don't concern me." "It's more than talk, I'm afraid," Jeb continued. "Overheard Wilkins and some of the council members planning to ride out here. Something about a moral delegation to convince you to send Miss Zamora away." Quinn's hand stilled on the brush. "When?" "Didn't say exactly. Soon, I gathered." Quinn nodded slowly. "Thank you for the warning, Jeb. Keep this between us for now. No need to worry Katherine with town gossip." But Katherine was more perceptive than Quinn gave her credit for. That evening, when he visited her cabin, she noticed his preoccupation immediately. "Something's troubling you," she said as he sat at her table, barely touching the stew she had prepared. Quinn considered deflecting her concern, but decided against it. Katherine had faced enough difficulty without being shielded from the truth like a child. "There may be visitors from Placerville coming to the ranch," he said. "Wilkins and his moral committee looking to cause trouble." Katherine's face paled. "Because of me." "Because Wilkins can't stand not having his way," Quinn corrected. "The man's had it in for me since I refused to sell him grazing rights 3 years ago. This is just his latest excuse. What will you do when they come?" she asked, her hand protectively covering her belly. Quinn met her eyes steadily. "Tell them this is my land and who lives on it is my business alone. They have no authority here. And if they don't accept that answer, then they'll leave disappointed." Quinn's tone made it clear he would not be moved on the matter. Katherine studied him for a long moment. "I won't be the cause of strife between you and the town, Quinn. If they insist, they can insist all they want," Quinn interrupted. "This is your home now, Katherine. No one's going to drive you from it." The conviction in his voice seemed to reassure her, though worry still lingered in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." The anticipated delegation from Placerville arrived 3 days later, just as the first significant snowfall of the season began. Quinn was in the barn when Hank came to alert him. "Riders coming, boss. Looks like Wilkins and 4 others." Quinn nodded, setting aside the harness he'd been repairing. "Make sure Katherine stays in her cabin. Ask Ellie to sit with her." Hank hesitated. "What if they demand to see her?" "They're in no position to demand anything on my land," Quinn replied, his voice level but firm. "But let's avoid confrontation if possible." Quinn washed his hands and donned his coat before stepping out to meet the approaching riders. They came up the main path to the ranch house, 5 men on horseback, their expressions grim beneath snow-dusted hats. Mayor Wilkins led the group, with Sheriff Miller, Reverend Porter, and 2 council members Quinn recognized but couldn't name. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Quinn called as they reined in their horses before the house. "Long ride in this weather." "This isn't a social call, Garrison," Wilkins replied, his tone clipped. "We're here on official business." Quinn leaned against the porch post, deliberately casual. "Official business stops at the town limits, Mayor. This is private property." Sheriff Miller dismounted, his expression uncomfortable. "Quinn, we're just here to talk. No need for hostilities." Quinn nodded to the sheriff, whom he still respected despite his role in this delegation. "You're welcome to talk, Sheriff. Not sure I like what you have to say, though." The men dismounted, stamping their feet against the cold. Snow was falling more heavily now, and Quinn gestured toward the porch. "Might as well get out of the weather if we're going to talk." The men filed onto the porch, but Quinn made no move to invite them inside. This conversation would take place on the boundary of his home, not within it. Reverend Porter cleared his throat. "Mr. Garrison, we've come about the Zamora woman." "Miss Zamora is under my protection," Quinn stated flatly. "Whatever you have to say it plainly." Wilkins stepped forward. "The town council ordered that woman to leave Placerville because of her immoral conduct. By harboring her, you're undermining the moral authority of the council and setting a dangerous precedent." "Miss Zamora has left Placerville, as ordered," Quinn pointed out. "What she does beyond town limits is none of the council's concern." "It's God's concern," Reverend Porter interjected. "That woman lives in sin, carrying the evidence of her transgressions. As Christians, we cannot condone such behavior by allowing her to remain in our community." Quinn's jaw tightened. "Seems to me the Christian thing would be showing mercy to a woman in need, Reverend. Or did I misunderstand those sermons you preach?" The Reverend flushed. "There can be no mercy without repentance, Mr. Garrison." "Miss Zamora has nothing to repent for," Quinn replied evenly. "She was deceived by a man who promised marriage then abandoned her. If there's sin here, it's not hers." "That's her story," one of the councilmen muttered. Quinn's eyes hardened. "It's the truth as I believe it. And on my land, my belief is what matters." Mayor Wilkins stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Be reasonable, Garrison. The woman is a burden you don't need. We'll arrange transportation to Denver for her. She can find her own kind there. Her kind." Quinn repeated, anger finally showing in his tone. "She's a schoolteacher who trusted the wrong man, Mayor, not a criminal." "She's an unwed mother," Wilkins insisted. "A bad influence on decent folk. What will people think when word gets around that you're harboring her?" "There are already rumors." "I don't give a damn about rumors," Quinn interrupted, his patience wearing thin. "Katherine Zamora stays here as long as she chooses. That's final." Sheriff Miller placed a restraining hand on Wilkins's arm as the mayor opened his mouth to argue further. "I think we've said our piece, Mayor. This is Quinn's land, as he's pointed out several times." The men stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the soft hiss of snow falling around them. Finally, Reverend Porter spoke again, his tone more conciliatory. "Mr. Garrison, we're concerned for your reputation as well as the moral climate of our community. Surely you can see how this arrangement appears improper." Quinn raised an eyebrow. "Miss Zamora has her own cabin, Reverend. There's nothing improper about offering shelter to someone in need." "Perhaps not in your eyes," the Reverend persisted, "but in the eyes of the community with respect, Reverend," Quinn cut in. "I didn't build this ranch for the community's approval. I built it for myself, and I'll run it as I see fit." Mayor Wilkins had clearly heard enough. "This isn't over, Garrison. The council will consider other measures." Quinn straightened to his full height, no longer leaning casually against the post. "Let me be perfectly clear, Mayor. Katherine Zamora is under my protection. Any action against her is an action against me. I don't want trouble with Placerville, but I won't hesitate to defend what's mine." The threat, though unstated, hung clearly in the air. Quinn Garrison was known as a fair man, but also one who didn't make idle warnings. Sheriff Miller broke the tense silence. "We should head back before this snow gets worse. Mayor, gentlemen, our message has been delivered." As the men mounted their horses, the sheriff lingered, turning back to Quinn. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing," he said quietly. "Not everyone in town agrees with the council on this matter." Quinn nodded his thanks, watching as the delegation rode away, their figures gradually disappearing in the thickening snowfall. Only when they were completely out of sight did he turn toward Katherine's cabin. He found her sitting with Ellie at the table, both women's faces drawn with worry. Katherine rose as he entered, her eyes searching his face. "They're gone," he said simply. "What did they want?" Katherine asked, though the answer was obvious. What they can't have, Quinn replied. Ellie stood, gathering her shawl. I'll leave you two to talk. Hank will be wondering where I've got to with this snow coming down. After Ellie departed, Quinn took a seat at the table across from Katherine. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across her face as she waited for him to speak. Wilkins and his committee wanted me to send you away, he said directly, seeing no point in sugar-coating the truth. I declined. Katherine's hands trembled slightly as she folded them on the table. They'll make trouble for you because of me. Let them try, Quinn shrugged. The North Star is my kingdom, small as it is. They have no power here. But your relations with the town were never particularly warm to begin with, he finished for her. I don't depend on Placerville's goodwill, Katherine. The ranch is self-sufficient in most ways, and what supplies we need can be purchased elsewhere if necessary. Katherine was silent for a moment, absently stroking her belly as she often did when thinking deeply. I never meant to bring conflict into your life, she finally said. You've been so kind, and I've repaid you with trouble. You haven't brought anything but help and good company, Quinn corrected her. The trouble comes from small-minded men who think their authority stretches further than it does. Katherine studied his face, her dark eyes serious. Why are you doing this, Quinn? Truly. You barely knew me when you offered me shelter, and now you're willing to antagonize the entire town on my behalf. Why? It was a fair question, one Quinn had asked himself more than once over the past weeks. The answer had become clearer to him with each passing day, though he wasn't sure he was ready to speak it aloud. At first, it was simply the right thing to do, he said slowly. No decent man could leave a woman in your situation with nowhere to turn. And now, Katherine pressed. Quinn met her gaze directly. Now, you're part of the North Star. What's mine, I protect. Something shifted in Katherine's expression, surprise, perhaps, or a deeper understanding of what he wasn't quite saying. Thank you, she said softly, for making me feel that I belong somewhere again. Quinn nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of the moment. The snow's coming down hard. I should check on the livestock before it gets worse. He rose from the table. You have enough firewood, food, plenty, Katherine assured him. Don't worry about me. But as Quinn trudged through the thickening snow toward the barn, he knew he would worry about her regardless. Somehow, without his quite realizing when it had happened, Katherine Zamora's welfare had become entwined with his own peace of mind. The snow continued through the night and into the next day, the first major storm of the season blanketing the ranch in white. By the time it passed, nearly 2 feet had accumulated, effectively isolating the North Star from Placerville and ending, at least temporarily, concerns about further interference from the town. Life settled into a winter routine. The shortened days meant more time indoors, and Quinn found himself spending evenings in Katherine's cabin more often than not. They would share a simple meal, then sit by the fire reading or talking until the hour grew late. Katherine's pregnancy had entered its final stages, her movements now slow and deliberate as she carried the weight of her child. Ellie's sister, Sarah, had arrived just before the snowstorm, a capable, no-nonsense woman who quickly assessed Katherine's condition and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. Another month, perhaps a bit less, Sarah had estimated. The baby's positioned well and you're strong. Should be a straightforward birth, God willing. The presence of an experienced midwife eased one of Quinn's primary concerns, though he still found himself watching Katherine carefully whenever they were together, alert for any sign of discomfort or distress. His protective instincts, always strong, had focused on her with an intensity that surprised even him. One evening in early December, As a bitter wind howled outside, Quinn sat at Catherine's table repairing a broken chair while she knitted by the fire. The domesticity of the scene struck him suddenly how natural it felt to be here with her, sharing the quiet comfort of home as the world outside grew harsh and unforgiving. "What are you thinking about?" Catherine asked, looking up from her knitting to find him watching her. Quinn returned his attention to the chair. "Just that winter's setting in proper now." Catherine smiled, seeing through his deflection. "You were looking at me rather intently for someone thinking about the weather." A faint flush colored Quinn's cheeks, visible even in the cabin's dim light. "Just making sure you're comfortable. You seem tired at supper." "I am tired," Catherine admitted, "but it's the normal tiredness of carrying a child, nothing more." She set aside her knitting, stretching her back slightly. "Sarah says the baby has dropped. It won't be long now." Quinn nodded, trying to appear calmer than he felt about the impending birth. "Everything's ready. Sarah knows her business and Ellie will help. And you," Catherine asked softly, "what will you do when the time comes?" "Whatever you need," Quinn replied without hesitation. "Fetch water. Keep the fire going. Stay out of the way if that's what's wanted." Catherine's expression softened. "You've done so much already, Quinn. More than I had any right to expect from anyone, let alone a man who was a stranger to me just months ago." Quinn set the repaired chair aside and moved to sit nearer to her, drawn by something in her voice. "We're not strangers anymore, Catherine." "No," she agreed, her eyes meeting his. "We're not, but I still don't know if I can ever repay your kindness." "I've never wanted repayment," Quinn said truthfully. "Then what do you want?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung between them, laden with meanings neither had dared express openly. Quinn found himself at a crossroads, knowing his answer could change everything between them. "I want you to be happy," he finally said. "You and the child, safe and happy here at the North Star." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them away quickly. "I am happy here. Happier than I expected to be ever again after Placerville." Quinn hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond helping her in and out of the wagon or steadying her on icy ground. Her fingers were warm and soft in his calloused grip. "Catherine," a sharp knock at the door interrupted whatever Quinn had been about to say. He released her hand reluctantly and rose to answer it. Hank stood on the porch, snow dusting his hat and shoulders. "Sorry to disturb you, boss, but we've got a situation." Two of the pregnant heifers broke through the ice on the north pond. "We got them out, but they'll need tending if they are to survive the night." Quinn nodded, duty immediately taking precedence over personal feelings. "I'll be right there." He turned back to Catherine. "I have to go." "Of course," she nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The ranch comes first." "I'll check on you in the morning," Quinn promised, retrieving his coat and hat from the hook by the door. As he followed Hank into the snowy night, Quinn couldn't help feeling that an important moment had passed. One that might not come again so naturally. The crisis with the cattle took all night to resolve. Quinn and his men worked tirelessly in the bitter cold, moving the injured heifers to the barn and treating them for exposure. By dawn, both animals seemed likely to survive, though one had lost its calf to the stress. Exhausted, Quinn made his way back to the main house as the first gray light of morning appeared in the east. He intended only to change his wet clothes before checking on Catherine as promised, but fatigue overcame him, and he fell asleep in his chair by the fire. He woke to urgent knocking several hours later. Disoriented, Quinn stumbled to the door to find Ellie on his porch, her expression tense. "It's Catherine," she said without preamble. "Her time has come earlier than we expected. Sarah's with her now." Quinn was instantly alert, all traces of sleep vanishing. "The baby's coming. Is she all right?" So far, yes, Ellie assured him. First babies often take their time, so we may be in for a long day. Sarah sent me to let you know and to fetch more towels and hot water. What can I do? Quinn asked, already reaching for his coat. For now, just pray, Ellie replied with a gentle pat to his arm, and perhaps stay close. Catherine's been asking for you. This last piece of information sent an unexpected warmth through Quinn's chest. She asked for me. Ellie smiled knowingly. Don't look so surprised, Quinn Garrison. That woman thinks the world of you, though heaven knows what she sees in a gruff old cowboy. I'm hardly old, Quinn protested automatically. Old enough to know your own mind, I should think, Ellie replied cryptically. Now, help me gather these supplies, then you can walk me back to the cabin. Quinn did as instructed, his mind racing with concern for Katherine and the realization that, after today, everything would change again. She would be a mother, with all the responsibilities and joys that entailed. How would that affect the tentative understanding that had been growing between them? When they reached the cabin, Sarah met them at the door, her capable hands already taking the supplies Ellie had gathered. She's doing well, Sarah reported. Early stages yet. The baby's taking its time, as they often do the first time around. Can I see her? Quinn asked. Sarah assessed him thoughtfully, then nodded. Briefly. She's between pains right now, but that won't last. And Quinn, no matter what happens next, remember that birthing is women's work. When I tell you to leave, you go without argument. Yes, madam, Quinn agreed, recognizing the wisdom in the midwife's instructions. Katherine was sitting up in bed, her face pale but composed. She smiled when she saw him, relief evident in her expression. Ellie said you were out all night with the cattle, she said. You should be resting. Quinn moved to her side, marveling that even now her concern was for him. I'm fine. How are you feeling? Scared, Katherine admitted, her hand automatically finding his as he sat on the edge of the bed. But Sarah says everything is progressing normally. She knows her business, Quinn assured her, squeezing her fingers gently. You're in good hands. Katherine's grip suddenly tightened on his as her face contorted in pain. Quinn felt helpless watching her struggle through the contraction, unable to do anything but offer his hand to squeeze. When the pain passed, Katherine relaxed slightly, her breath coming in short gasps. That was stronger than the last, she murmured. Sarah appeared at Quinn's shoulder. They'll keep getting stronger, which is exactly as it should be. Now, Quinn, it's time for you to wait outside. We've got work to do in here. Quinn reluctantly released Katherine's hand, but she caught his wrist as he started to rise. Quinn, she said softly, thank you for everything. He nodded, words failing him at the intensity in her eyes. I'll be just outside if you need anything, anything at all. The next hours were among the longest of Quinn's life. He paced the small clearing in front of the cabin, splitting wood when he needed to work off nervous energy, never straying far from the door. Occasional sounds from within, Katherine's muffled cries, Sarah's firm instructions. Ellie's soothing murmurs kept him in a state of constant alertness. Hank brought food at midday, which Quinn barely touched, and reported that the injured heifers were recovering well. The ranch foreman studied his employer's tense expression with knowing eyes, but made no comment on Quinn's obvious concern for the woman inside. As afternoon faded toward evening, the sounds from within the cabin grew more frequent and intense. Quinn's pacing became more agitated, his helplessness in the face of Katherine's pain increasingly unbearable. Finally, as the first stars appeared in the eastern sky, a new sound cut through the winter twilight, the thin, indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Quinn froze in his tracks, his heart pounding as the cry grew stronger. A baby. Katherine's baby had arrived. It seemed an eternity before the cabin door opened and Ellie appeared, her face tired but wreathed in smiles. "A boy," she announced, "healthy and strong with a fine set of lungs on him." Relief washed through Quinn like a physical force. "And Katherine, tired but well," Ellie assured him. "Sarah says she's never seen a first-time mother handle it better." Quinn sagged against the porch post, tension draining from him so suddenly he felt lightheaded. "Thank God," he murmured. "She's asking for you," Ellie added. "We've cleaned up and she's decent. You can go in now if you like." Quinn didn't need to be told twice. He entered the cabin quietly, conscious of the momentous event that had just taken place within its walls. Katherine lay in the bed, propped up on pillows, her face drawn with exhaustion but glowing with a new mother's joy. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, lay a tiny bundle from which emerged occasional snuffling sounds. She looked up as Quinn approached, a smile transforming her tired features. "Quinn," she said softly, "come meet him." Quinn moved to her side, gazing down at the infant in wonder. The baby's face was red and slightly squashed from his journey into the world, with a shock of dark hair plastered to his tiny head. As Quinn watched, the child yawned, his little mouth forming a perfect O. "He's perfect," Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion. "Would you like to hold him?" Katherine asked. Quinn hesitated, suddenly acutely aware of his large, rough hands. "I don't know how." "It's not difficult," Katherine assured him. "Just support his head and keep him close." With extreme caution, Quinn accepted the small bundle. The baby seemed impossibly light yet somehow substantial, a new life warm and breathing in his arms. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. "What will you call him?" Quinn asked, carefully returning the child to Katherine's arms. Katherine smiled down at her son. "I've been thinking about that. I'd like to name him Daniel after my brother, Daniel Quinn Zamora." Quinn looked up in surprise. "Quinn, if you don't mind," Katherine said, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Without you, he might not have survived. I want him to carry the name of the man who saved us both." Quinn found himself at a loss for words, overwhelmed by the honor she was bestowing. "I'd be proud for him to carry my name," he finally managed. Katherine reached out to take his hand, her eyes bright with tears and something deeper. "I don't know what the future holds for us, Quinn, but I want you to know that whatever happens, you'll always be part of our lives, Daniel's and mine." Quinn squeezed her fingers gently, his own vision blurring slightly. "I'd like that very much, Katherine." As he sat beside her, watching mother and child in the warm glow of the fire, Quinn Garrison knew with absolute certainty that his life had changed irreversibly. The solitude he had once cherished now seemed empty compared to the fullness of this moment. This connection to Katherine and her son Daniel Quinn, a child who already held a piece of his heart. The world outside might disapprove, might whisper and judge, but here in this cabin on the North Star, Quinn had found something he hadn't realized he was missing, and he had no intention of letting it go. Winter settled deeply over the North Star in the weeks following Daniel's birth. Snow fell frequently, transforming the landscape into a pristine white expanse broken only by the dark lines of fences and the smoke rising from chimneys. The cold was bitter, temperatures dropping well below freezing most nights, making the warmth of hearth and home all the more precious. Katherine recovered quickly from childbirth, her natural strength and determination serving her well. Sarah stayed for a week to ensure mother and child were thriving, then returned to Green River with promises to visit in the spring. Quinn found himself drawn to Katherine's cabin more frequently than ever, ostensibly to check on their welfare, but in truth because he found greater peace there than anywhere else on his land. He would arrive with firewood or supplies, then linger far longer than necessary, captivated by the small miracle of Daniel's existence and the quiet joy in Catherine's eyes when she looked at her son. The baby thrived, gaining weight and strength daily. He had Catherine's dark eyes and what promised to be her determined chin. Though Quinn occasionally fancied, he could see hints of his own features in the child's expressions, a fancy he kept strictly to himself, knowing it came from wishful thinking rather than reality. Christmas arrived, bringing a brief respite from the ranch's winter work. Ellie organized a celebration at the main house, inviting all the ranch hands and their families. Katherine attended with Daniel, who at 3 weeks old slept peacefully through most of the festivities, waking only to nurse and receive admiration from the gathered company. Quinn had worried that the ranch hands might harbor some of the town's prejudice against Catherine's unwed motherhood, but his concerns proved unfounded. The men and their wives had come to know her over the preceding weeks and judged her by her character, rather than her circumstances. They welcomed her as one of their own, cooing over the baby and treating her with the same respect they showed Ellie. As the holiday gathering wound down and families began to depart for their own cabins, Quinn found himself alone with Katherine by the fire. Daniel slept in a makeshift cradle nearby, his tiny face peaceful in the flickering light. "Thank you for including us," Katherine said softly. "It's been a lovely Christmas despite everything." Quinn glanced at her curiously. "Despite what?" Katherine smiled wryly. "Despite having a newborn, being miles from civilization, and living under the cloud of scandal." "None of that matters here," Quinn assured her. "The North Star makes its own rules." "So I've noticed," Katherine replied, her eyes warm as she looked at him. "You've created something special here, Quinn. Not just a ranch, but a community. A family of sorts." The word family hung between them, laden with implications neither had yet addressed directly. Quinn found himself at another crossroads, similar to the moment that had been interrupted on the night Daniel decided to make his appearance. "I have something for you," he said, rising from his chair and retrieving a small package from the mantelpiece. "A Christmas gift." Katherine accepted the carefully wrapped bundle with surprise. "Quinn, you shouldn't have. I have nothing to give you in return." "You've given me plenty," Quinn replied, nodding toward the sleeping Daniel. "More than you know." Katherine unwrapped the package to reveal a small, exquisitely carved wooden box. The lid featured an intricate design of wildflowers, each petal and leaf detailed with remarkable precision. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the carving. "Open it," Quinn urged quietly. Inside the box, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a simple gold ring. Katherine looked up at Quinn, her eyes wide with question. Quinn took a deep breath, finding courage in the hope he saw in her expression. "I've never been a man of many words, Katherine. But some things need saying, even by those of us who find it difficult." He took the box gently from her hands, removing the ring. "These past months, watching you face adversity with such grace and strength, I've come to admire you more than any woman I've ever known. And in admiring you, I've found myself feeling things I never expected to feel again." Katherine's breath caught, her eyes never leaving his face. "Quinn, let me finish or I might lose my nerve," he said with a small smile. "What I'm trying to say is that I love you, Katherine Zamora. I love your courage, your intelligence, your kindness. I love the mother you are to Daniel, and the woman you are to me, someone who sees past my gruff exterior to whatever good might be inside." He held up the ring between them. "This was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died, saying I should offer it only to a woman I could love completely, without reservation. I never thought I'd find such a woman, until you came into my life." Katherine's eyes filled with tears as Quinn continued, his voice growing steadier with each word. "I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife. Not because you need my protection or my name, but because I believe we could build something good together. Daniel would have a father who would love him as his own, and you," his voice faltered slightly, "you would have a husband who would cherish you all his days." Katherine was silent for a long moment, tears spilling onto her cheeks. Quinn waited, his heart pounding, prepared for either joy or disappointment. "Are you certain?" she finally asked. "Taking on another man's child, facing the town's judgment, it's a heavy burden." "Daniel isn't a burden," Quinn replied firmly. "He's a blessing. As for the town, let them judge. Their opinions mean nothing compared to our happiness." Katherine reached out, placing her hand over his that held the ring. "I've been afraid to hope," she admitted. "Afraid to believe that something so wonderful could come from such difficulty. But if you're sure, truly sure—" "I've never been more certain of anything," Quinn assured her, Katherine's face transformed with a radiant smile. "Then yes, Quinn Garrison, I will be your wife with all my heart." Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her gently into his arms. Their first kiss was tender, a promise of the love they would share in the years to come. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. "When?" Katherine asked, her fingers touching the ring in wonder. "As soon as the weather permits travel to the county seat," Quinn replied. "Unless you'd prefer to wait until spring," Katherine shook her head. "I've waited long enough for happiness. The sooner we can be a true family, the better." As if on cue, Daniel stirred in his cradle, his tiny voice demanding attention. Katherine moved to lift him, and Quinn watched as she soothed the infant with a mother's instinctive touch. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that his impulsive decision to help a pregnant woman cast out by her town had been the best choice of his life. January brought the deepest cold of winter, with temperatures so low that breath froze in the air and metal stuck to bare skin. The North Star turned inward, focusing on survival and the care of livestock. Quinn spent long days ensuring the cattle had access to feed and unfrozen water, returning to the main house each evening exhausted but determined to spend time with Katherine and Daniel regardless. News of their engagement spread quickly among the ranch hands, met with universal approval. Ellie in particular was delighted, hugging Katherine fiercely when told. "I've been praying for this since you arrived," she confessed. "Quinn's been alone too long, and you deserve happiness after everything you've endured." February arrived with slightly moderating temperatures, though travel remained difficult. Quinn and Katherine began planning their life together in earnest, discussing everything from the arrangement of furniture to how they would raise Daniel. "I want him to know the truth when he's old enough to understand," Katherine said one evening as they sat by the fire in her cabin, Daniel sleeping peacefully in the cradle Quinn had made. "About his father, I mean." Quinn nodded thoughtfully. "The truth is always better than secrets. But he'll also know that being a father is about more than blood. It's about being there day after day through good times and bad." Katherine reached for his hand, her eyes soft in the firelight. "You'll be a wonderful father to him, Quinn. You already are in all the ways that truly matter." In early March, a brief thaw made the roads passable, and Quinn seized the opportunity to travel to the county seat with Katherine and Daniel. They were married in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, with Hank and Ellie as witnesses. Katherine wore a blue dress Ellie had helped her alter for the occasion, with wildflowers Quinn had found in a sheltered valley tucked into her hair. The justice of the peace raised an eyebrow at the infant Katherine carried, but asked no questions. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to Ellie's eyes. "Mrs. Garrison," he murmured against Katherine's lips, the name a caress. Mr. Garrison, she replied, her smile radiant. My husband. They spent their wedding night in the town's small hotel, Daniel sleeping in a drawer lined with blankets beside their bed. It was not the conventional beginning to a marriage, perhaps, but it suited them perfectly, a family created through choice and love rather than obligation. Spring came to the North Star in fits and starts, the land awakening slowly from its winter slumber. Katherine and Daniel moved into the main house, though Quinn insisted on maintaining her cabin as a schoolroom of sorts. You're a teacher at heart, he told her. There's no reason you can't continue that work. The ranch hands' children need education, and I suspect there are others in outlying homesteads who would benefit as well. Katherine embraced the idea eagerly, already planning lessons and making lists of books they would need to order. By April, she had 4 regular students, the children of ranch hands, and 2 more who came twice weekly from a neighboring homestead. As Katherine had predicted, Mayor Wilkins and his moral committee remained hostile, but their influence waned as other Placerville residents began to question the harsh judgment that had been passed. Sheriff Miller visited occasionally, always friendly, and reported that opinion in town was shifting. Folks have short memories, he told Quinn during one such visit, and most people have troubles of their own to worry about without maintaining grudges against neighbors. In May, when Daniel was 5 months old and spring was in full bloom across the ranch, Quinn took Katherine riding to a hilltop overlooking the North Star. The valley spread below them, verdant with new growth, cattle grazing peacefully in meadows dotted with wildflowers. Katherine dismounted with Quinn's help, then took Daniel from the special carrier Quinn had designed to allow the baby to ride safely with them for short distances. The infant was alert and curious now, his dark eyes taking in the world around him with interest. I brought you here for a reason, Quinn said as they settled on a blanket in the sun-warmed grass. I wanted you to see the North Star as I first saw it, 15 years ago, when it was nothing but empty land with potential. Katherine looked around, appreciating the panoramic view. It must have taken tremendous vision to see what could be built here. Quinn nodded, his gaze moving from the vista to his wife and son. Vision, hard work, and more than a little luck, but something was always missing, even after I'd built the ranch into what it is today. What was that? Katherine asked, though something in her eyes suggested she already knew. A heart, Quinn replied simply. The North Star had everything it needed to function, but it lacked the one thing that would make it truly complete: a family. Love. He reached out to touch Daniel's cheek gently. You gave me that, Katherine. You and Daniel. Katherine leaned against him, her head on his shoulder as Daniel babbled happily on the blanket before them. We gave each other what we needed, she corrected. I needed safety and acceptance when no one else would offer it. You needed someone to remind you that a man isn't meant to live alone, no matter how self-sufficient he might be. Quinn turned to kiss her, still marveling that he could do so freely, that this remarkable woman was his wife. I never thought to find such happiness, he admitted. Especially not from offering shelter to a stranger in need. God works in mysterious ways, Katherine quoted with a smile. Though I doubt the Reverend Porter would approve of the particular mystery that brought us together. Quinn laughed, the sound carrying across the hillside. His approval means less than nothing. We have all that matters right here. As they sat together on the hillside, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains, Quinn Garrison reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a solitary rancher to a husband and father, all because he had followed his conscience when a pregnant woman was cast out by her town. The North Star had always been his refuge, a place apart from the world's judgment and expectations. Now it was something more, a true home, filled with the sounds of a child's laughter and a woman's love. What had begun as a simple act of kindness had blossomed into the greatest blessing of his life. And as Daniel Quinn Garrison for Quinn had formally adopted him after their marriage reached up with tiny hands to grasp at the wildflowers Katherine held, Quinn knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, however unexpected their beginnings, lead exactly where they're meant to. 5 years later, the North Star had grown and prospered along with the Garrison family. Quinn had expanded the ranch's operations, adding sheep to the cattle and increasing the acreage under cultivation. Katherine's small school had flourished, now serving 12 children from the ranch and surrounding homesteads in the renovated and expanded cabin that had once been her temporary refuge. Daniel, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his mother's dark eyes and his adoptive father's determined jaw, had been joined by a 3-year-old sister, Elizabeth Grace, who had inherited Quinn's blue eyes and Katherine's gentle spirit. A third Garrison child was expected in the autumn. Much to the delight of both parents, relations with Placerville had gradually normalized. Mayor Wilkins had been voted out of office the previous year, replaced by a more progressive businessman who recognized the economic importance of maintaining good ties with the North Star, the largest ranch in the county. Even Reverend Porter had moderated his stance, particularly after Quinn made a substantial donation toward a new church roof. On a warm summer evening, as the family sat on their porch watching the sunset, Daniel looked up from the wooden horse Quinn had carved for him. "Papa," he said, his young face serious, "Mr. Peterson in town said something strange to me today when Mama took us to the store." Quinn and Katherine exchanged glances. Though they had always intended to tell Daniel the truth about his birth when he was old enough to understand, they hadn't yet found the right moment. "What did he say, son?" Quinn asked, lifting the boy onto his lap. "He said I was lucky that you took me in even though I wasn't really yours," Daniel reported, his brow furrowed in confusion. "But I am yours, aren't I, Papa?" Quinn held the child's gaze steadily. "You are mine in every way that matters, Daniel. I chose you as my son, and I have loved you from the first moment I saw you. Nothing will ever change that." Katherine moved to sit beside them, Elizabeth dozing against her shoulder. "Daniel," she said gently, "there's something your father and I have been waiting to explain to you when you were a little older, but perhaps now is the right time." With simple words appropriate for a child's understanding, they told him the story of how Katherine had come to the North Star, how Quinn had offered sanctuary when no one else would, and how they had fallen in love while preparing for Daniel's birth. "So you see," Katherine concluded, "your father loved you before you were even born, which is quite special indeed." Daniel considered this solemnly, but Mr. Peterson made it sound like something bad. "Some people don't understand that families are made in different ways," Quinn explained. "Some by blood, some by choice. Ours was made by choice, and that makes it just as strong, maybe even stronger than any other kind." The boy nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. "I'm glad you chose us, Papa," he said, nestling against Quinn's chest. "So am I, son," Quinn replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Every single day." As twilight deepened into night, the family remained on the porch, bound together by love and the shared journey that had brought them to this moment. Whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, secure in the knowledge that the most powerful families are those created not by circumstance or convention, but by the deliberate choice to love without reservation. For Quinn and Katherine Garrison, what had begun in crisis had transformed into the greatest blessing either could have imagined: a life rich with purpose, joy, and the enduring warmth of a love that had overcome prejudice. defied convention, and created a legacy of compassion that would echo through generations to come. In the heart of Colorado's rugged landscape, on the land Quinn had named for the guiding star of the North, they had built not just a ranch, but a home. A place where a pregnant woman cast out by her town had found not just shelter, but belonging. A place where a solitary cowboy had discovered the family he never knew he needed. A place where love, in its purest and most courageous form, had flourished against all odds.